Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined once again by Alan Lazaros. He's appeared on the show before, as has his partner in success, not crime, but success, we'll say, Kevin Palmieri. And the last time we had a tremendously raucous time together that included a lot of um, misunderstandings, back and forth, a lot of vulnerability, but it made for an excellent short that did lots of views on TikTok and YouTube.
Nice.
So not all bad things, not everything bad came out of that disaster. So this time around, it's hopefully going to be a lot better now that we have a much better understanding of one another. And we're going to go in a completely different direction. Last time we heard all about Alan's life and how he got to where he is and how he redefined himself and all this sort of thing. And now we're going to hear about the present. What happened after he redefined himself and how he has found his success over the last couple weeks. In process of preparing for this, I have been listening to the podcast he does every day with his business partner Kevin, and I have probably of they have so many because they do every day, so they're up to like 1,800 and change. And so I only do once a week, so I'm only in the modest 200s, and I take time off. They don't take a break. I take a lot more breaks. So we're gonna find out how they got to that place, how they started, level of university, all this type of thing, and find out how he's gotten to where he is now. So welcome, Alan, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Gratitude first. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful to be here again, and we had a very fascinating conversation last time. You're an interesting cat, Cameron. You've done a lot of very fascinating things. You're very eclectic is the word that I would use, and I'm grateful to be here. Thank you. And yeah, when it comes to Next Level University, Next Level U, pun intended, I'm going to be 36 on Sunday, so I'm going to be Alan version 3.6. And I started saying this recently. I'm a computer engineer. And Kevin jokes and he says, that's Alan's disclaimer. Now he has permission to be a dick. And he's joking. But ultimately, I'm a computer engineer, so I think very mathematically and strategically and statistically, and I'm starting to lean into that a bit. So I hopefully can add some value here today.
Well, fortunately, we don't have to. We don't always worry about adding too much value around here. We have lots of interesting, fun conversations, so the pressure is very low. Um, but I wanted to start from the very beginning of the conversation to relax our way into this. Is how did you start Next Level? How did you get that idea, and how did that all come together?
So Kevin and so we talked about my car accident last time, but I'll catch people up briefly. So unfortunately, my father passed away in a car when he was 28, when I was 2. And when I was 26 years old, I got in a car accident that was extremely rattling. Physically, we were okay. Fortunately, I was in a very, very, very safe Volkswagen. Thank you, Volkswagen. But mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, it really shook me. And so after that, I started my own company. It was called Alan Lazaros LLC, what you'll never learn in school but desperately need to know. And it was based on this premise of, in school, I didn't learn a ton about finance. In school, I didn't learn much about nutrition or fitness. In school, I didn't learn about communication or emotional intelligence or vulnerability. And so there's a lot of things that school does very well. Particularly, I think math and science, I think they do great. However, like formal education, there's a lot of things that aren't taught. And I remember I took my first finance course during my master's in business. And I remember thinking to myself, we use money every day. We eat food every day. We're in relationships every day. Yet we didn't learn that much about money, food, or relationships. And so I want to try to bring personal development to the school systems. I did a few speeches at high schools, middle schools, several colleges, one of my alma maters, WPI. And I realized very quickly that that is the wrong tagline to try to get into schools and colleges for speaking. And so I decided to start a podcast instead called Conversations Change Lives. And the premise of the podcast, Cameron, was you and I talk and I ask you behind the scenes what it was like to be a graphic designer, what it was like to be a filmmaker. Because basically when I was a kid, I decided to be an engineer. But I didn't really know what an engineer's day-to-day life was like. So I wanted to interview an engineer and say, what did you think it was going to be like when you were in college or high school or trade school versus what it was really like? So that these kids can make an informed decision about their careers and really explore these careers through these amazing stories and people before they make a long-term choice. Because when you pick a major in college, you're basically making a choice not only what college to go to and what major to pick based on very little data. For me, this is the extent of it. It was, Alan, you're really good at math. Engineers are really good at math. Engineers make a lot of money. Alan, you should be an engineer. And I made a whole career trajectory based on just that. And so conversations change lives. Kevin was my first guest. He was a foreman for a weatherization company. And he had a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast, which is change the way you think, change the way you act, change the way you love. And I was his first guest. And we decided to team up, and we had the worst named podcast of all time, which was the Hyperconscious Podcast meets Conversations Change Lives podcast. And then we eventually went all in on the Hyperconscious Podcast. And essentially it was two bodybuilder, sort of bro, existentialist, deep conversation guys, change the way you think, change the way you act, change the way you live. And then we rebranded about 500, 600 episodes in or so to what's now known as Next Level University, Next Level You. Become the best version of yourself, health, wealth, life, and love. 1% improvement in your pocket from anywhere on the planet, completely free. And that's really the shortest possible version of it. But ultimately it's evolved quite a bit, and it's been a tremendous growth journey for sure.
The title is almost as long as an episode of the podcast. I told you I moved in the interim. I've moved. You notice the studio is different.
It is different.
And so I also went to Wisconsin. Well, I was in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm now in Hartford, Connecticut. Temporarily, not staying here. I don't love New England that much. I mean, shout out New England, but I'm
in New England as well. Massachusetts.
So, yeah, I am. Yes, I am. Well, I mean, I'm literally. We could have done this live. It's like
you're an hour and a half away from me, probably. I used to. Sorry to interrupt you, but I used to. I was in corporate, and one of my territories was Connecticut, so I know Hartford very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here for kind of the winter, and I'm going to figure out something different next spring. But because I'm of the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic is where I kind of prefer to be. But then I also went to Wisconsin, so I had all this dead time and road trips to listen to your podcast. So when I say I listened to several dozen episodes, I really did. And they are delightfully short, which is why I make the joke. The title of the show is almost the length of the whole runtime, because you guys only do 25, 30 minutes, as I recall. Yeah. And sometimes a little bit less. Yeah.
The idea is just 1% improvement per day. We don't want to overwhelm anybody. We want to make it sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's quite entertaining. I think that's a good, I mean, that's obviously a very popular niche, there's something about that whole male self-improvement thing that's a very hot topic these days. Why do you think that is? I'm not in a hot niche, so I want to hear from the elite.
I don't know if I'd put myself in the elite, but I appreciate it. I think that self-improvement, personal growth, personal development, mental health, I think these things are becoming more ubiquitous, which is really good. I studied the whole industry. I sound so pretentious sometimes. I studied the whole industry starting 10 years ago.
This is the venue. Everything I do is all very highbrow, intellectual, sophisticated, which is why no one watches. All this sort of thing. So this is if you're in the mood to be pretentious, I have built the ideal forum for you. Please do it.
All right, perfect. So here, I'm going to disclaimer. I'm an engineer and I might come off as pretentious. But ultimately, I started studying the industry 10 years ago, and the self-improvement space evolved. It's been around for probably 125 or so years, and you've got the Napoleon Hills and the Og Mandinos, and you've got the Bob Proctors and those kinds of people. Then you've got the Tony Robbins and the Oprah and that sort of generation, and then you've got the Darren Hardys and the Ed Miletts and that kind of thing. And so the industry's evolved a lot over the years, and I think that there has been a large outcropping, for lack of better phrasing, of men in fitness / self-improvement. So I spent some time in the fitness industry. I was a male model. fitness competitor, fitness coach, fitness model, fitness competitor, fitness coach. And I did 3 different competitions. I always joke, I lost I went into the first one arrogant, lost, went into the second one humble, stomped everybody, and then got cocky again and lost the third one. I'm playful with it, but ultimately that's kind of what happened in hindsight. And when I was in the fitness space, I realized there was some self improvement, but not a ton. And then I went to the personal development space and the self improvement space, and I realized there's very little self improvement. Fitness. So I realized these two worlds were not one and the same, but they are integrating quite a bit. So I think Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, over the last decade or so, fitness in particular, plus sort of self improvement, has become trendy and cool. And then, Kevin and I joke, we say we're selling kale outside of a candy store because a lot of our stuff is very existential and it's very hard to ask these tough questions like, what is your purpose and why are you here and what are you good at and what do you suck at and what do you need to work on and what are your goals and metrics and habits and systems and skills? And it can be very overwhelming for people. So I always feel like, because I don't know if it's the engineer in me or if it's just who I am, but I've always felt like a little too much for most people. So I think that the reason why self-improvement has become trendy, and it's sort of like, he calls it bumper sticker self-improvement, these quotes, believe in yourself, that kind of stuff, that's very surface level. If you dig deep underneath that, most people actually don't believe in themselves. Most people do struggle with self-doubt. Most people don't have a ton of self-worth. Most people do need to work on starting from starting small and having the humility to start small and build from there, rather than setting these big, hairy, audacious goals type of stuff.
Yes, that is no. I think you've hit upon a trend, and as I was kind of saying before, particularly in looking at our market demographics, one of the things that I think is fascinating about your show, having now listened to so much of it, um, is you guys have a very obviously a very that good male bro dynamic, and that's very popular now. That was not a lot of those people you mentioned when they a lot of those a lot of those people when they first started out. That stuff was primarily built for women. Like Tony Robbins is guilty, more so, less so Ed Milet, but Tony Robbins especially, that's more about for women. Now I find, and I think this is true of you and Kevin, now you have a whole new brand of this stuff, particularly geared towards men, in a way that wasn't really the case when, like, I was in high school, early college, or things like that. Sort of. I mean, if a man was reading a self-development book, is because his wife or girlfriend made him do it, not because he willingly did it now. But now the culture,
unfortunately, yes,
unfortunate, but fast forward 20 years and how the culture has changed.
Yeah.
Which I think is absolutely, absolutely fascinating. What do you credit that to? That cultural shift? I have lots of thoughts, but people don't come here to listen to me. Go ahead.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm actually curious to your perspective as well. So we actually surprisingly have a large number of women who listen to the show. And I think that as we've grown, we've attracted more and more men. In the beginning, it was mostly women. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, I do think statistically speaking, and I'm saying this as a man, so don't hate me, men out there. I do think statistically speaking, women tend to be more humble. I think they tend to be more focused on self-reflection and contemplative. I think men are much more extrinsically driven, statistically speaking. And we both have both, but I do think that
we socialize boys and girls that way specifically too.
Exactly. And okay, so young girls are encouraged to have a diary, which helps them self-reflect and talk about their feelings and emotions, and guys don't typically have diaries. And so not only is it a little bit biological, but I think it's more cultural than anything. And I think that's shifting. And the reason,
the sad thing is, men used to keep very fascinating diaries. When a lot of our primary historical documentation comes from especially military men.
Yeah.
Yes, military men. I mean, a lot of our records of battles are the general writing about the course of the battle. Lincoln's diaries were published, which is a lot about the Civil War from the inside.
Marcus
all this
Aurelius.
Type of thing. Yes, the whole men not writing down thoughts and feelings is a very not even 20th century post World War II phenomena. But continue.
I didn't actually know that. That makes a lot of sense. That makes
No,
a
there's
lot of
there's
sense.
a lot of very famous men from the past, but all the way back to antiquity. From antiquity, examples would be Pliny the Elder, Pliny the Younger, Plutarch. A lot of
Yep.
those were not books published for sale. They were books. They were really diaries and private writings. The only reason we know who Plato and Socrates were is because we have notes from their students from their lectures. All their work has been lost to time.
Wow.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of our primary historical material from a lot of significant battles and historical events is from the private diaries of people, mostly men,
Yeah.
educated men who wrote things down. One of the great tragedies of the 21st century is
Yeah.
that it's going to be very hard for historians in the future to get primary sources of now because we don't write things down physically anymore. And as we're finding out with the internet is not forever. In fact, it's incredibly temporary and a lot can be lost. We've lost 33% of the internet in the last 10 years. And
Whoa.
so, yeah. So for those of us that do write things down in a form that can be kept, um, or archive or all this type of thing are really doing the work of future historians because a lot of this stuff is incredibly ephemeral. So just loop it back to your point, it is has to do a lot with socialization and culture because in the post World War II men, the writing down of thoughts, feelings, events of the day, all this type of thing kind of fell out of fashion, and
Why?
it's been that way for so many decades now that it's now become this like, or I don't do that. Why would I do that sort of thing? And it seems to be normal, but it was not always that way.
I have my journal right here. It's Dreamliner. It's, and again, not unapologetic plug, I guess. Next Level Dreamliner. It's on Amazon. But the reason I mention it is not to sell it. I mention it because it asks you a question every day. So the question for the day is, if you could do one thing to change the world for the better, what would it be? Why that one thing? And writing down and reflecting, writing down your experiences is so important. Yeah. And I wish
Yeah.
that I had done it earlier. I didn't start doing it until after I was 26.
I had a very tortured relationship with that because I was homeschooled and it was a required thing to do growing up. And so I now do it very rarely. Just because and there's some other trauma attached to it that I will not go into at this juncture. Um, but I don't do it very much anymore, but I do have a folder in my Ulysses writing app on the occasion that I do want to write something down or make something of note or whatever have you. But it is unfortunately incredibly rare. And I think people kind of forget our modern ideas of masculinity, especially when it comes to something like this, are very, very new. And I'm
Yeah.
talking, there are people still alive who were children when this was not the case, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think it was because, um, well, I think a couple things happened. Mass literacy happened. People forget most people didn't go to high school till after 1945.
Yeah.
Even modern education after the eighth grade is a fairly modern thing. We did not have universal adolescence and going into high school till after World War II.
Yeah.
And I think,
And still to this day, only 37% of Americans have higher education. I looked it up the other day. 37.7%. Yeah.
yes, yes. And when you get to my level with an advanced degree, you're down to low teens. It's 12 to 14%. Which
Okay.
I did not know or understand until I was about finishing my MFA, and someone sat me down and was like, the reason this is hard, the reason why this seems to be such a problem, and why this wasn't like your first graduate degree and all this type of thing is because this is at a very different level and you're among a very small elite group of people. Um, and I hadn't really clocked that because I wasn't getting a PhD, so my brain was
What
not
percentage
in
is
that
PhD? Do you
direction.
know? We can always look that up.
Yeah, I'm not. I think it's 12, but they kind of lump
It's got to be
PhDs and
lower than
JDs
that.
and a bunch of advanced degrees together. Um,
Pull up my other computer. Google stuff live on the podcast. I love it.
Yes.
Got to learn what's going on. I was surprised. I thought it was higher than 37%.
No, I mean, you have to remember for even just finishing college, a 2% here it says for
2%.
just a PhD. Yes, of
Yeah.
Americans with a PhD. Well, and I'm using this. This is going to reinforce my point. The reason it's expensive, it takes a long time. If you're going to get a PhD, that's most of your 20s gone. That's one of the reasons I didn't do one. Um, and all this sort of thing. And it's also takes a great deal of privilege to get to that. To even just to get to college requires a pretty good amount of privilege. To go all the way to a PhD is even more. And
Yeah.
so it's rare for certain people from certain backgrounds to get that far, unless you're my buddy Nick, who went to community college to become an auto mechanic to afford to get his PhD in history.
Cool.
He's on a wholly other path. He's just doing his own thing. It's great. But yeah, I mean, so it's a it's a whole other situation. But my point being is that the people who tended to keep these journals and keep these diaries and all this type of thing tended to be educated, usually wealthy, aristocratic, or military men. We don't get a lot of primary sources from the common folk, although there are a few.
Yeah. Is
It's
that why
not
the
a
history
panacea.
is primarily, you know, there's a lot of history that, and my girlfriend's very aware of this too. It's unfortunately, there isn't as much history. The history of women has been less than the history of men, unfortunately. I think it's been more patriarchal and more from the male's perspective. I mean, I even read a
Yes.
book. I have a book club, but we do it every Saturday, and we're on our 19th book, and I made the mistake, and a lot of women are in there, right? And I made them, and I love that. I love that. I made the mistake of doing Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That book is too outdated. I mean, there's some serious sexism and racism in that book.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it until I read it in book club and I was going, oh, so I'm sorry. I actually apologized to the whole book club. I said, the ideas and the
Yeah.
concepts in this book are powerful, but it's outdated and it's definitely got some sexism and racism that I think is unacceptable at this stage.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, the reality. I mean, you have two problems with the history. With history, is that one, women tended to be domestic. Not that this doesn't happen in the home; it definitely does. But that was also coupled with not a lot of time because stuck on domestic duties, and then two, women tended to not be educated. The only women who ever learned how to read and write tended to be very wealthy and aristocratic, if that, especially in Europe. It was a little bit different in other cultures, but even in China, it was still rare, all this type of thing. And so you don't have a lot of that stuff. It just didn't get written down. What I think is so great now is historians are going back and they're picking through what does exist and they're looking for those stories of those amazing women. Like the most successful pirate in world history was a Chinese woman.
Cool.
Yeah, she had a fleet of 120 ships. She was a terror of the globe.
Well,
Historians are finally going back and digging through accounts, books, all this type of thing, looking for these women, all this type of thing. Social media has allowed a lot of women, especially in the crafting space, to revive and talk about crafting methods from the Middle Ages, all this type of thing, and starting to bring that stuff forward and give that stuff a platform that it had never had before in
nice.
needlecraft, handicraft, all this type of thing. And so I think one of the reasons we don't do it anymore is because such things, writing things down, keeping a journal, keeping a diary, that I think was associated mostly with the wealthy, the leisure, all this type of thing. Um, and especially in America, after World War II, we tended to identify much more. I mean, we tend to identify with the provincial working class to be very pretentious about it. We tend to, as a national identity, the way we think of ourselves, and you see this with the way billionaires and the wealthy act, we tend to think of ourselves as the provincial everyman sort of thing, identify with that caricature, that archetype, that stereotype. That is a very unique to our country. They don't do that in Europe. The aristocracy very much thinks of themselves as the aristocracy. They definitely think they're better than other people, and some of them are not afraid to tell you about it.
No kidding.
And
Yeah.
many of the and so they have a whole different way of comporting themselves that in their world among their peers and the people they think are is entirely normal and is entirely just the way that things are done.
I never
And
understood that though. The just
that's
because of your last name you are somehow better than someone else, you know? That's
well, yeah,
wild.
I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not just. It's not just last name. It has a lot to do with land, estate, duty, nobility, keeping a country together. We kind of forget that a lot of the aristocracy actually under feudalism actually had things to do. They were responsible for maintaining the farms, building housing. I mean, they had things to do in society. They had a specific function, and if they didn't, I mean, as a peasant, there was nothing worse than living under a lord, an earl, a baron, a count, a viscount, whatever have you, that didn't tend to care about the stuff and let things fall into disrepair. And there's lots of stories about,
Yeah.
irresponsible aristocrats who did that sort of thing. Or, the
What does
infamous young
aristocrats mean? What does that stand for?
well, it's a portmanteau of two Greek words. So, much like bureaucracy, aristocracy. So you have aristo, and graduate is a group of things. Usually means elevated. It's a portmanteau of two Greek words. Um,
Elevated people is what it means? Aristocrat?
yeah, like, or elevated group would be a
Elevated
good way to
group.
translate it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
they actually at one time had jobs. The Enlightenment, capitalism, Industrial Revolution broke feudalism and mercantilism at the same time,
Yeah.
and it greatly reduced the role of aristocracy in society. They were not always just wealthy hangers-on. They actually used to have things to do, um, and so it's not just about last name or family or anything like that. They actually served a function and a purpose in a society, and especially when countries were monarchies, the validity of the ruling monarch was based on their acceptance among the aristocracy. And
Yeah.
new monarchs, when would have a change of house or a change of family, the new person would usually come from another landed wealthy member of the aristocracy.
Where did the aristocracy start? Was it Britain who, and then I know France obviously took up on that.
Oh, that goes back to antiquity. The whole idea, that whole idea basically is any country where you have a group of wealthy primary landowners that own vast tracts of land and have lots of people working for them willingly or unwillingly. So you can go back, the first aristocrats go back probably to ancient Sumer. It probably goes back that far. Post agriculture, Sumer. We know that, I mean, you had nobles in Persia, the great empires, Persia, Syria, Babylon, all this type of thing. Because remember, the veracity of power in the monarchy comes basically from the consent of large landowners. Basically, is where that comes from. As it manifests itself in Europe, comes from the Roman household system,
Yeah.
which had to
Yeah.
do with the citizen at the top and his patronage to people below him, wives, children, freemen, slaves. I could that the books have been written about the Roman household system, but are the
Gladiator 2 coming out. I'm excited.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, very, yeah. That's a microcosm of how the Roman household system worked. And so, in ancient Rome, when you joined a house, there was usually a citizen. He would usually, at minimum, have a wife and children. If he was of the knight class that ran the legions, he would have he could have other freemen, slaves, women of the household, all this type of thing. One of the reasons citizens joined to fight in the legions was to get land. That's why Rome kept conquering it, because they had to keep giving it away to the people who conquered it.
That's fascinating. That's
Yeah, and
fascinating.
if it
So that was
one
the carrot at the end of the why?
it was,
Yeah.
yes, because land ownership meant that your family would have some place to be, theoretically, in perpetuity, and you would have ready access to some modicum of wealth. So even if
Yeah. And
were
then you farm
a
the land, and then you contribute to the society, and
yes,
so
and you can sell it, you can rent it, all this sort of thing. And for those that were wealthy and could afford patronage, you could have, in the cases of the very wealthy Romans, you could have an army of freemen, slaves, poets, writers, all this type of thing, looking for small amounts of money that you would give them so they could continue working on whatever it was. And all of the citizen was responsible for the actions of all those people in his household, and also vice versa. If you were taking patronage from someone, whatever you did would reflect back on them. So it was this sort of odd social contract sort of thing, and it was out of the Roman household system that we kind of got our modern system of, like, especially in Britain, like the modern class system.
Yeah.
The British class system is based on the Roman household system. And that's how those systems have worked in Europe. And that would continue until the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution came along, broke mercantilism, broke up
And then
feudalism.
entrepreneurship was flourishing.
Yes,
Yep.
all of a
And
sudden, what you start getting trading going with, especially with China, Marco Polo. We're up to the 12th century now.
yep.
Marco Polo trading with China. You get luxury goods coming in, and you have a middle trading class who's wealthy but unlanded, and unlanded is the important part of that. Wealthy but unlanded, a new middle class of people that began to compete powerfully with the aristocracy. They, because their wealth was not derived from land, it was derived from trade, they were able to expand, relatively quickly. A modern example of that, it was very fashionable because the British aristocracy was broke in the 19th century. It was very fashionable in the 19th century for the British aristocracy to go to America, find a wealthy American industrial heiress, and get her to marry into their family and bring a lot of money with her. And you see a lot of these Astors, Vanderbilts, Roosevelts marrying into these old British families and bringing millions of dollars of new funding with them to keep the estate going. That's actually the initial premise of Downton Abbey, the TV show. Cora married into the Crawleys because she was the daughter of a wealthy American industrialist, and she brought money into the family to keep Downton Abbey, the estate, going. That is one of the premises of Downton Abbey.
My
And
goodness.
so, yeah, and so although in America it kind of strikes us as this, I'm sorry you own a big house and why do we care? In other ancient societies, your survival and honestly your only chance for social mobility really came from joining somebody's house, getting some patronage, and moving up in that manner. And we use political patronage in this country. People
Yeah.
get people's political careers started.
Lobbyists. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, all this type of thing. People elevate themselves
It's
by
more
attaching
entrepreneurial
themselves to
though.
the right person.
The
It
the US
definitely is.
Constitution is more entrepreneurial. Yeah.
Well, it is, and because we don't allow titles of nobility, the Constitution expressly forbids it. It really can be, one of the great things about this country is if you are smart, if you are talented, and not me, but if you're smart and if you're talented and you can align yourself with the right people, you can go quite far. And we have this long tradition in this country of great leaders and great people coming sort of seemingly out of nowhere. One of the great tragedies of the 21st century is our social mobility engine has ground to a halt, completely ground to a halt. It's
What
one
do
of
you
the
mean?
great tragedies. So today we're recording this on November the 15th, 2024. Your likelihood of social class change in terms of being wealthier than your parents. So if you're born into a working class, moving up one or two rungs of the ladder, your chances of doing that now is basically zero.
Yeah.
It
You
can be
can do
done,
it. You can
but
do
it's
it. Yeah.
incredibly hard. It's
Yeah.
incredibly difficult. Just because a lot of the opportunities, a lot of the access to those opportunities and all this type of thing are extremely gate kept. People talk about, oh, what we do without Bill Gates and Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos. Well, Jeff Bezos' parents were rich. Bill Gates' dad was an investment banker. That's how he got the $1 million to start Microsoft. When you start looking behind the
Yeah.
curtains of a lot of these guys, they're not regular everyday people who were working a regular everyday job and got lucky. That
Yeah.
does happen, but it's rare. Now, I'll give you a good example. The guy who started Zappos, that he was that guy.
Yeah. Nice.
Absolutely. He was fresh off the boat with a dream and not much else.
No kidding. Nice. And then you've got
Yeah.
Zuckerberg too, who was in college, right? So that
Yeah, but he was also going to Harvard,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
his
true. Yeah.
parents were not poor by any stretch of the imagination. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's great.
yeah, I mean, but this is my point: is that there was a time in this country, and this is even true in my family. My great grandfather on my dad's side, he was a ditch digger during the Depression, for a company that literally could not afford to pay him. They had he was owed back wages. His proposal to his wife Betty Cowan, who I was great friends with, he said, "Marry me for my back wages." This is like 1934, and he started out as, you know, Irish son of son of an Irish Catholic family, one of, I think, nine children. And when he died the executive of a paper company, West Virginia Pulp and Paper Company, which became Midwest Tobacco, which got bought out by the Koch brothers. Um,
Nice.
and I mean, he lived that American dream 110%. And the sad reality is now the chance, if he started today, the chances of that story repeating itself is less than 10%, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's one of the great tragedies, but that's one of the
We
great
still
things
got to
about
try.
this
We still
country.
got to try.
Yes and no. I
Well,
mean,
if you believe it's not possible, then you won't take action. If you don't take action, it's not possible. But I understand. And the statistics are important, right? So you can't be naive to the fact that it's going to be unbelievably. So I never used to have the courage to say this, but after my car accident, I haven't had a full day off in 10 years. And that doesn't mean I work every day. And I'm very grateful to have come. You know, father passed away when I was young. Stepfather left at 14. My real last name's McCorkle. That's a whole backstory. But I often say I look like a silver spooner. If you're on YouTube, you see all my awards and all that stuff. And but it couldn't be farther from the truth because I started from zero essentially after my stepdad left. And fortunately, I was born in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, I did really well in high school, and they gave me financial aid and scholarships to go to WPI, which is kind of like a mini MIT. And I got to go to one of the best engineering schools in the world, fortunately, because I got financial aid and scholarships, which without that, I wouldn't have been able to go. So thank you, to the US for that. But ultimately, I do feel like I've been able to build my own wealth and build my own company and build my own life far beyond what I had growing up, particularly after my stepdad left.
well, and that's
After
one of the great things about this country is the ability to do that. Although statistically it's very rare now, in a way that it did not used to be.
Yeah.
Um, Particularly if you were white. Um,
Yep.
that's always one of the great things about this country is that we did not we have bought into the British class system kind of, but not nearly the way they do. And we don't have that 1,000-year history of the Roman household system holding us back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if things are a lot, especially, out west, things are a lot more fluid. There's a lot, and we also had this huge continent. We turned a continent into a country.
Yeah.
It was not that long ago. You could hike out to, Cherry Creek, set up a shack, call it Denver, and start a city. That's literally how Denver started. They were panning gold in Cherry Creek, like, we like it here, we'll call it Denver. There's a park of my town where the suburb my parents live in. The main road is called Wadsworth because Henry Wadsworth discovered gold in Ralston Creek in 1854, and that was the founding of the city of Arvada.
Nice.
Yeah, this country offered. Why do you think millions of people came here? Is our country afforded them that opportunity, to do that in a way that was not possible in the old world?
Well,
It just wasn't, and so
Canada has more land than the U.S.
Yeah, but
Geographically.
half of it's frozen.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. So it's not
We're at the right latitude.
Yeah, it's not exactly. It's not just the amount of land. It's the latitude. It's the
Well, and we can
agriculture.
also go on about, we have one of the most advantageous navigable waterway systems on the planet.
Yep, of
We
course.
have, every single climate you could
Oil.
possibly imagine.
Lots of oil, gold.
Which was not important until it was, but yes, we have lots of that. We also had a tremendous amount of trees for
Yes,
timber
so
and
much
coal,
forest,
which was very important. In New England, the whaling fleet was the largest and most successful in the world when whale oil was important as a lubricant, as a fuel source, as all sorts of things. We literally
That
killed
makes
the
me
whales,
sad.
so we almost drove them extinct,
Makes me
sort of
sad.
thing. Yes, but I mean, New England was built on whale oil, on the wealth of whale oil. I mean, really and truly.
Boston? Boston Harvard.
Yes, but even here in Hartford, there used to be a hockey team here called the Hartford Whalers back in the day. They got moved to something else. But I
Yep.
mean, but even so, I mean, throughout the whole, I mean, whaling was just an absolutely massive, massive business because whale oil was used in everything,
And that
sort of
was
thing.
when Moby Dick was published, right?
Yes, yeah, Herman Melville, yeah, absolutely. That was based upon his. Yes, there was another great book called 3 Years Before the Mast that was also written around the same time about the same situation. And so yes, there's all these tremendous opportunities that just were not anywhere else, and that is the secret sauce of this country. It's very simple. Is you can come if you're a young Indian family, you can come here, set up a 7-Eleven, and become wealthy.
Hmm.
There's nowhere else on the planet that anyone allows that. That is a uniquely American thing that we let people
If you
do.
look at the
So
stats,
this
I only look.
conversation has totally gone off the rails, for which I apologize. But
No, no, it's been great. It's been great. If you look at the stats in 2023, I looked at them in 2023. I haven't looked at them in 2024 yet. But the GDP in the U.S. by far largest. It's
yeah, so
significantly
$21
larger.
trillion dollars per annum.
Yeah, it's wild. So the economy of the U.S. is so large in comparison to all the other countries, and I just it's just fascinating to, and I feel grateful to obviously have been born in a place that, like I said, invested in my education. So ultimately, for anyone out there, there is opportunity. There's opportunity, and if you believe in yourself and you work hard, you can't guarantee you're going to succeed, but there's opportunity, and it's better than not trying. And I just want to make sure I make that clear.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I definitely encourage people to do things that I feel like are achievable and small things that they can do. The one caution I always give to people, and maybe it's unique to this industry and what I do, and you've been so much more successful than I have been, is the power of just meeting the right people. I think in all of these stories, people forget there are small things along the way and people that give you opportunities that open doors for you and all this type of thing. And as someone who's had more doors shut in my face than doors opened for me, I am always one of the reasons I always kind of asking people how you got into this sort of thing is I love to hear those stories of that one person, that one situation, that one opportunity that changed everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because it kind of serves as a bit of a reminder to everyone that nobody does it alone.
Yeah,
Not
for sure,
really.
for sure. No one, no one.
It definitely takes, the right people, the right look, all this type of thing to kind of make it happen. I think the wonderful thing is there is open opportunity to do that. The person I'm going to interview when we get off, who's going to be sitting for a bit because we're going to run over. He's going to come on and talk about the storage business. And there's a lot of those small sorts of opportunities out there. Car washes, laundromat, storage, all this type of thing. If I had it to do all over again, I would not do this. I would open a laundromat or a storage unit place or something silly like that, just completely, not at all, and just kind of quietly operate my little business sort of thing and go from there. But the reality is, for people who don't think they can create something for themselves, there are lots of small businesses like that with honestly even not a lot of capital you can get involved in, and they're just cash cows. They just print money, and if you're willing to sort of quietly just operate them and not drive it into the ground and all this type of thing, you can do very well for yourself.
Yeah, the simple
um
fundamentals. The simple
yeah.
fundamentals compound over time. I'm a business coach. Everyone from a famous model in Dubai to, hey, I want to start a YouTube channel. I'm 16 years old, and everyone in between. I've got 27 people on my roster. I'm a business coach. And what you learn is that you can put yourself in a certain opportunity and put yourself in position to succeed, and you can maximize the probability of that success. And I do goals, metrics, habits, skills, and identity, and you can work on yourself and you can work towards your goals and dreams. However, you can never forget that we all have different potential and we all look different, and not everyone's going to be a famous actor, and not
Yeah.
everyone's going to be a model, and not everyone's going to be, Joe Rogan. And so, however, that doesn't mean not to start a podcast. You might want to do your own unique flavor of that, or maybe you want to start a laundromat or whatever it is. So I believe in potential, I believe in human beings, but I also believe in accurate thinking, and I do believe in dreaming, but I also believe in having grounded dreams that are grounded in the reality of who you really are and your actual strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's why I always tell myself is that if I had to start, I would if I had to do all over again, I would never do this because I'm not actually really a fit for it. I would always tell people like, yes, open that storage unit place, open that car wash, open that laundromat, all this type of thing, open that massage studio, all that type of thing, because the length of runway required to see success is just so much shorter and involves a lot fewer things going right for you, sort of thing. There's a lot less sort of variables and all this type of thing. Which I think is really, tremendous. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for people if they're willing to kind of expand their minds outside of the box, the employment box, the job box, and think about, where that opportunity might be, do their homework, learn the business, all this type of
Get a
thing.
mentor. Apprenticeship used to be such a big deal, and I feel like we've lost
Yeah.
that. Get a mentor.
Well, that
Mentors are really important, or
circling
coaches.
back to our long and unnecessary conversation with the Roman household system, a big part of the advantages of the Roman household system was that apprenticeship, that learning, whether it was agriculture or especially in war, if you were the knight class, which was a little level down from the still landowning, but not the aristocracy. Next level down, the knight class. That was how you would train in war to lead legions. It was all about that sort of from the bottom up, learning and mentorship and all this type of thing. That was the advantage of the Roman household system. So
I
if you
think we
were
need
a
more
freeman
mentorship.
non-citizen and you wanted to get into an industry like copper working, metal making, brick making, all,
Right.
construction, all this type of thing, aligning yourself with the right house, the right patron who does that sort of thing was your way into a career in Roman
Super
society.
important. And
Yeah.
that still exists. You can do that. You can go under the wing of a mentor who can guide you, and you will get opportunities because the mentor needs people. We do this within our own community. We have people on our team. The business owner needs people to help grow the business, and the people need mentorship and coaching to learn how to build their own thing and learn how to build a business and learn how to grow and scale. And so I am such a big proponent of mentorship and coaching and therapy and having these people that can help guide you to the best version of yourself. And I started mentoring 10 years ago. I did 2 years for free, and I've been coaching for the last 8, and I've done hundreds of clients at this stage, some twice a week, some weekly, some biweekly, a couple monthly. But ultimately, all different industries, all different countries, everybody needs guidance. Just got to make sure you have the right mentor, because if you have the wrong mentor, they will drive you off a cliff.
Yes, no, that's absolutely, 110% the case. And I think it's one of the great things about this show is I've gotten to meet all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of stories, all this type of thing. And had all sorts of interesting conversations along the way. And I'm perpetually fascinated by everybody has that person, that one person, who really helped them change their life and all this sort of thing, and kind of guided them along the path, sort of thing. And it's always fascinating to kind of hear who that was and how that worked and all this sort of thing. And sadly, we've now talked long. I don't remember what we were talking about before we went off on the history, the history of the aristocracy in 10 minutes, all this sort of thing. But
Well, we were talking about
you're
self improvement and where that came from and how that works, and then we got
well,
into the
I
history
remember
of it.
we were talking about diaries and journalism and why we don't do that anymore.
Yes,
That's right. Yes,
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 yep,
yes.
yep.
And so, yes, but going back to that, I'm sure it's an instrument of self improvement. Um, what do you find most helpful about that for you?
I loved what you said about perpetual fascination. I would say, I asked my therapist this because I met her several years ago in a very unique circumstance, and I said, had you ever met? She has told me that I'm very unique, and I appreciate it. And I said, what about me though? I want to understand. I want to learn about me. What was different? And she said, your enthusiasm. I had never seen, now I'm a little tired. This wasn't as enthusiastic, but my perpetual curiosity, my perpetual enthusiasm, you said perpetual fascination. I am perpetually fascinated with how things are, why they are that way. That's why I loved hearing you kind of go off on all that history, because I'm connecting dots. If you understand how the world works and why it works that way, how you work and why you work that way, how people work and why they work that way, psychology, neuroscience, all this stuff, the body, physiology, you now can have a higher chance of probability of achieving your goals. And so to your point, you asked me a question about self-improvement. I think that's really what self-improvement is a perpetual fascination with learning about yourself so that you can better yourself.
Yes, I mean that is, I think I agree with you. I think my only problem is what happens when it all goes too far? Is it possible to have too much of it?
Self-improvement?
Yes.
I would say there's a it's like a rubber band. You want to stretch it but never snap it. Right? There's a constructive amount of working out. You can work out too much and overtrain, but you also can undertrain. And so physical, mental, emotional, spiritual self-improvement, I think as long as it's from a place of self-acceptance, I accept myself for who I am, and I'm going to also improve myself from that place versus, hey, I'm going to try to change myself because I don't actually accept myself type of thing. And
Yeah.
I think that that's kind of the growth journey that we're all on, right? Is how much do you actually accept who you are and then grow from that place rather than I wish I was different. I wish I was taller. I wish I was shorter. I wish I was blonde. I wish I was not. I wish I was, that kind of thing. So accept who you are for who you are. Love that and become the best version of that. And I think that's, again, my 36-year-old version of what I think we're all striving for.
Yes, I would agree with you, and I say that as someone who is definitely the least good at that. Um, I oftentimes talk about. I said someone with my skills and talents who's not me would do very well. I
Why do you
think I
say
think.
that?
No, I think I'm the. I mean, I've kind of long thought I'm sort of the pro, sort of the problem in the situation. I don't know. I find being I'm a very odd person. I'm a very odd set of things mushed in one human being. And for most people, it's too much.
Yeah.
It's too much to handle. If I were kind of one of those things, it would be okay, but to do all of them at once, too much for people.
You gotta
Um,
own who you are. That's the start. Accept who you are, own who you are, be who you are. Trust me, I feel like too much too.
yeah, so I oftentimes be kind of like, it's like I wish I could transplant the great things that I do into someone who has the looks and the right background to really fly with it. I sometimes kind of feel like it's kind of wasted on me, sort of thing, because not the right person, not the right background, not the right anything, in the hands of a great person, what I do could be tremendous. And worked that it was a different way.
Well, I hope that you find that greatness within you, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here. This is my second time here. I think you have interesting conversations with interesting people, and I learn something every time, and I'm grateful. And that's really the main thing is learning. I'm learning about you. I'm learning about the world. I learned a ton about history. So I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Hold that thought.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate that. I do have an encyclopedic knowledge on, world events and history and politics and why things are the way they are because read about this stuff. Right now I'm reading a book about called American Midnight that is here's how microcaustic I'm getting. The history of 1917 to 1921 and the first Red Scare. I'm getting micro niche at this point. I'm reading about 5-year periods of history now.
Nice.
But yes,
That's
and
awesome.
the lead up and lead into World War One. So it's yeah, I know I that stuff I just end up knowing a lot about sort of unnecessarily.
You ever see Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, the podcast?
Oh yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Do you is history your biggest passion?
No, I don't have passions. That's not a thing here.
You very clearly are passionate about history from my perspective.
And I just know a lot about it. And the same,
Because
I have the same thing with I enjoy studying society. That's why I know so much about aristocracy and British and nobility and all that. I do the same thing about American high society. One of my favorite books in the world is a book called titled Mrs. Astor Regrets, and it's about the
so you
last
just read a
Mrs.
lot of books.
Astor.
You just read a ton of books.
Yeah, not as much as I anymore. But yes, I have. There's the official book list on the Cameron Journal. You know, I'm very well read, and I tell people if you want
Nice.
to become as well read as I am, here's what you read,
Nice.
sort of thing. But for me, it's also into it's film, it's television, it's the stuff behind all of that stuff. I am the person who will look at a scene and go Google to find out if it's real, if it's not, all this type of thing. I just have this wandering curiosity of
Cool.
stuff and things that, again, the average person does not, will not ever care about.
Yeah.
And but I mean, a lot of the Cameron Journal, and I think one of the reasons why, it's never, ever really caught on is because it's an exploration, it's a journey. I find stuff that I think is insanely interesting and I share it with people, everything from trains to dams to why that is that way or why that system works that way or this hidden bit of infrastructure you had no idea
Cool.
prevented, I mean that. And so I just kind of find this stuff, present it to people. The same thing with people. We have people on, we have these fascinating conversations, all this type of thing. It's all part of this sort of exploration of the world, you know.
Cool.
I mean, I was the kid who read the Encyclopedia Britannica at 8 years old because I wanted to
Nice.
know everything as fast as possible. And
I love it.
so, yeah,
You ever
so
see the Friends episode where it was Science Boy was the comic and he says, what was Science Boy's superpower? And he says, a superhuman thirst for knowledge.
yes, yeah,
Maybe that's your
exactly.
superpower.
Yes, I mean, I think the thing that impresses people the most is not only do I know it, but I have a command of it. And so when I talk about this stuff, I have years, people, dates, locations, all this type of thing. And in one thing that makes me unique is in the age of Google, and I always tell people I'm a bit of an anachronism. In the age of Google, people don't know stuff like that anymore.
Yeah.
People know how to look it up and know how to find it. They don't know stuff anymore. And in
Yeah.
an age before we had information so available, you had to
Actually know it.
you had to inculcate it and know it and have it to use, sort of thing. Um and uh and that is very rare now. And so most people are impressed, and also how I shift in between topics and somehow tie it all back together in a nice neat little bow.
You
People
made it
find
work.
that endlessly yes, people delight when I bring it all kind of full circle back to where I started from.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you for
So
having me. And I enjoy fascinating perpetually fascinated was what you said. I am perpetually fascinated with life, understanding myself, other people in the world. And I'm 36 and I'm going to keep learning as much as humanly possible because that's how you learn how to make good choices and how you learn how to have an impact. And yeah, I'm just grateful. Yeah, thank you for having me.
yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, I think, I your journey is quite is well, and I said this, but when we talked about it before, it's quite tremendous in the fact that, what you guys have put together is really, really kind of neat. Not necessarily, I think it's just, I think it's really great. I think it's really great.
Thank
And
you.
I think it's kind of fascinating how I'm always fascinated by people who manage to find something like what you've done and make it a tremendous success. I think it's really kind of interesting
Thank
how
you.
people do
Thank you.
that.
If you have
So,
any feedback about the show, what was your favorite thing about the show?
um, what was my favorite thing? Well, there was a lot of it, which I thought was interesting. So I could kind of skip around and find the topic or something that I was interested in and listen to that for a little bit. And then I could, so there was a lot, I think it was the volume of it. So I could kind of find the things that interested me, sort of thing. Sometimes I would listen to something because I was curious of what you were going to say about it. But then other times I would come along and I would be kind of like, oh, this is actually, kind of helpful and all this stuff. So I think I enjoyed that aspect of it. It is rather short, which is nice. All the podcasts are usually very long because I do a very long podcast and it's very long. So I think the brevity of it was nice, and I thought the volume of it was quite nice. I think the back and forth you guys have going is quite good.
Did you do any laughing? Was there any laughing?
No, but I'm very hard to get laughing because I used to do stand-up comedy. I was a headlining stand-up comedian
Okay.
for a while, so the bar is high. Like, I mean,
Constructive feedback? Anything that you think we could improve?
um, I would say both of you need to let the other one talk more.
Yeah.
You two run over each other way too much, and I sometimes found myself being like, "How I wish Kevin had finished his thought on that," or "I wish
Damn.
Alan kept going with it. There was something there that I'm not going to get to hear now," sort of thing. So I would just be, let yourselves have space. That's one of the things I do at this show that people comment me on is not that you'd know by listening to this one, but I usually try to keep my mouth shut and let the guests talk and really just let them go and not insert myself too much, not make it about me. I would say just give each other space. Just give
I
each other
appreciate it.
space.
That is feedback I've gotten lately, and it's important. It's tough to
Yeah.
do because we have a good banter going, and sometimes you need that, but you also gotta. You can't only have high notes, right? You don't want to just go to the club. You also want the space as well.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to have the kind of the space to get those thoughts out because you two have both very unique perspectives. And if there's any one thing as I would like to, hear the fullness of those.
Yeah.
Is quite good. So
I appreciate
that's
it. Thank you
yeah.
for listening and thank you for the feedback.
Yes. Well, why don't you tell us where we can find you online, where we can listen? We'll close it down here.
Okay, so thank you again for anyone listening. Appreciate it. And thank you again for having me. So my name, Alan Lazaros. You can Google my name. And at this stage, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn are probably the best ways to reach out. If anyone wants to reach out, wants a business coach, wants self-improvement, everything I do is level up yourself, level up your podcast, level up your business. We currently work with 63 podcasters, and I work with 27 clients in businesses, but it doesn't have to be big businesses. I work with small business owners. I work with entrepreneurs that are at the very beginning. So everywhere from multimillionaires all the way to the very beginning of I want to start a YouTube channel. So I will help you dial in your goals, metrics, habits, all that kind of stuff. Next Level University is the podcast. Next Level You, pun intended, the next level version of yourself. We are on YouTube. We're on all the podcast platforms. Also, the website is nextleveluniverse.com. So the podcast is Next Level University. The website is nextleveluniverse.com, which is all things next level. We have a book club. We have our own journal that I mentioned earlier. We do a monthly meetup every month, and we got a lot of cool stuff on there. So yeah, reach out. And if you do, please just, provide context to where you found me from Cameron, and because we all obviously get a lot of spam.
Of course. All right, Alan. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.